Okay, so we thought a good place to begin, and after this, start hearing from us, from everybody here. Of all the words. Oh, was there one more? I'm sorry.
Yeah, one more.
Yeah. Very clear. No. No, we ended with communion. Yeah, I deleted that one.
Sorry, this is editing in real time.
Yeah, you're just putting this together. But the question wasn't it,
What do we mean,
forgiveness?
what do we mean by debts and debtors? What's our understanding of debts and debtors?
Yes, we thought it'd be nice to just warm everybody up.
Ahead of looking or reading.
Just for you, please, everybody, don't have to raise your hands, just tell us, what does it mean? I mean, you were a debtor to someone, other people are your debtors. Well, just, I mean, in 2023, America.
The phrase doesn't do as much for me as what I grew up with, which was trespasses.
That's a good point. One of the things,
Trespasses to step on somebody else, both emotionally and physically. Oh, that's interesting.
Well, there's two versions,
Trespass.
bankers or sheriffs, right? So-
Yeah.
it's, so some churches, the Eastern Orthodox Church, it says, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us.
And that's
So the
the
Episcopal
difference.
Church.
Right, so
So United Methodist Church, and I had to switch completely.
which of course thinks about your turfing someone's lawn or doing something really awful. It's not just monetary, but here debts.
Well, it's the same thing, you can interpret that more broadly as well. You-
Exactly.
Debts to society because of good deeds done for you by others. There are markers out there. They don't have to be monetary markers, they can be other forms of.
And sort of debts.
Transactional deficits.
Broadly, I owe you a debt of gratitude.
Yeah.
Mr. Cummings.
So the question is, where did what's the etymology of that word debt? When did it first appear in the English language and what does that mean? It's probably,
Yeah,
OED probably has a definition.
we'll get into that. And even before the English language was invented.
But now we use sins over covenant living.
That's
There's a lot of,
too.
a lot of different translations to the word and the idea.
Yeah. And so I had to find a couple things from the Old and New Testaments here. And so this from the letter to the Colossians. As you were dead in trespasses, God made you alive together with him, and he forgave us all our trespasses, erasing the record that stood against us with its legal demands. He set this aside, nailing it to the cross. He disarmed the rulers and the authorities and made a public example of them, triumphing over them in it. And then Luke himself in the Gospels simply, do not judge and you will not be judged. Do not condemn and you will not be condemned. Here it is, forgive and you will be forgiven. I didn't type that correctly. Obviously, you'll be forgiven.
I heard it.
There were the trespasses.
Mhm.
The last one is interesting. Forgive and you will be forgiven.
Yeah, not to jump around too much, but a lot of the things that we read, it seems almost transactional. God will forgive us our sins, but only if we forgive others.
It's the way that reads, yeah.
But there are other places where grace is there not to be asked for. And we'll be forgiven no matter what, if you want to look at it that way.
That's when I read this week that prayer, that was my big question. Is it strictly transactional? If I don't forgive someone, God's never going to forgive me. It's strictly almost a legal thing. If I do, then it's taken away. And versus, is it in the nature of God just to be forgiving regardless? Because you have prodigal son, right? And ridiculously, God forgives him. What is ridiculous? When you share the prodigal son with Jews and Muslims, I think, no, they don't quite see it that way. There's no, you know, there has to be some kind of, what's the word, restorative justice that takes place for them. So I don't know, I think that's a good question. How do you see that?
Well, I wonder if it hinges on the word as. Forgive us our debts as we will forgive our debtors as you have forgiven us. So instead of being,
A transaction,
and so that way it doesn't become transactional, it's more as a model, like.
I
you will
see it as a
forgive
model.
us.
I think that's a good
Right,
way.
you will forgive us, and in the same way, we will forgive our debtors.
Isn't that nicer? It makes me feel better rather than if the word as had been the word because.
Or looking at a global
Yeah.
world,
Yeah.
you know, ultimately, we will all be forgiven if we each work at it.
right? But can anyone forgive like God can forgive? So would any of us, you know, camera going through the eye of a needle again? Kind of thing.
Right, Alan, you provided us with that great book. There's been a lot of books written just simply on the Lord's Prayer and all the different interpretations that have been done by theologians and laymen, lay people. It can be ridiculous. Why? Why forgive some of the awful things that have been happening?
Very practical, but it's coming from a psychological perspective.
Yes.
It's very burdening to carry the weight of not forgiving somebody. And so I think part of this is just a practical thing, is if you are able to forgive, that releases the burden from you and opens you up for love.
For the person who has been harmed.
Yes.
But I think it gives grace to the other person as we are giving grace by God, but it also relieves you of a tremendous burden and makes you available for those relationships. So I see it as two different things.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. I think it would make me think of it. It's a deeper level.
I will say this, when I did a Turkish American Society, we had a rabbi and Rabbi Andy and myself, and then a Muslim, a lay person who presented on forgiveness from our perspectives. And I've done this actually twice, but this last time was the most informative, and the Jewish perspective was, oh no, look, the rule is if you have done something wrong against someone, to be forgiven, you must go to them and ask for their forgiveness. They can turn you down the first time, you can go back the second time, they can turn you down again. Third time, they have to forgive you. Yes.
You have to repent to be sorry for your sins
Repent what?
and be sorry for your sins.
Right, this is the thing, and they have to offer, and God can't forgive your personal sin against someone else. Only that person can release you in the Jewish faith. And the other part of that was there are exceptions. Murder and rape, for instance, that so damage the human being, you can't really force someone to forgive for that. And I found that very interesting. So the idea is you have to somehow try to make right. And I have to say there's something good about that too, but I don't know. It just seems impossible.
I'm sort of thinking about Putin
Well,
and forgiving somebody the instance of murder, you know, are we helping?
right. Well, yeah, all great food for thought with the old, Hebrew Bible, not the Old Testament, but in the New Testament, different ways of looking at, there was always the law, and then Jesus, it's called the new covenant, right? Where maybe forgiveness can transcend all that, but without laws, how are we gonna look at each other,
And then you think about Israel, how hard is it to reconcile for the Palestinians?
I was gonna say, how are they gonna do that?
I mean, maybe that understanding forgiveness makes it really difficult to move on.
So moving on.
Yes, there's a lot.
That's another topic.
Thank you, guys. I hope the same thing.
I wanted to bring another perspective. I look at it as sort of a catechism of something that I pray to help myself remember what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
This is not just a law, I can vary from the path of intelligent behavior.
So that's,
And I need constant reminder of what the path is. I don't know about the rest of you, maybe you're probably all better than I am.
Andrew?
Well, I was wondering, since you said the third time they have to forgive you, do the church coming to do something if, I mean, because if it's something that the person has to decide. If for the third time they still think whatever you did is unpardonable,
Right.
what would the church do? Because they say you have to.
I didn't go in that much detail, but it's interesting in Matthew's teaching, they also have, if someone in the church is not acting right, they go to them individually, and then you go as two of friends and you bring them before the church. And that's in Matthew's gospel, which is more like the Jewish teaching. So I'm just throwing a wrench into the cogs here. It's not,
So we also, okay, if, something to be forgiven. The word sin comes up a lot. And, first of all, I thought this was kind of just a basis to go on under John. If we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves. And the trust is not in us. So let's all admit that, no one's perfect. And we're gonna need some forgiveness ourselves at some point. And then Matthew. And this is just part of a really long, great passage. Then Peter came to him and said to him, Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, not 7 times, but I tell you, 77 times. So at the time, was Jesus saying, that's an infinite amount of time? How could you actually ask for forgiveness 77 times? 7 times 7?
77 times 7.
yeah,
Yes, 140 times, right?
Oh, is that another translation?
Yes.
yeah,
7 times 77?
77 times 7. Yeah.
infinity is what it.
So maybe it has to do with,
Right,
the idea of not just a single one offer, but it's incorporated into your everyday life.
Would that like lose its meaning of the point, because the person doesn't just says, oh, yeah, forgive me, but the 100th time.
Maybe it's not transactional at all. Maybe it's just to live the rest of your life in a state of forgiveness. That's what, at the time, 77 times 7, might as well be forever. I don't know what's next.
maybe there's truth in all of them. I mean, really, yeah, sometimes one definitive answer, but maybe there's truth in having this internal forgiving spirit, but there's also truth in going to someone and asking for forgiveness and.
Good point, a lot of different ways to look at it, and Carly mentioned psychologically, we saw a lot of things tied into psychology. Because there's different ways you can sin against somebody, and so, some are worse than others, and some need deeper levels.
I think about some of the most powerful things, examples of that were, when I think it was the Quakers were attacked by a gunman. And he went into their school and killed, and they just forgave him. I think they saw it, they saw it in a different way, but they were able to forgive. And I remember another story about a woman, whose daughter was killed by her boyfriend. And she found a way of forgiving the young man. And then that enabled that young man to go on to recovery and to really get to a different point in his life as a result of her forgiveness. So those are very powerful, I think, examples of what that kind of forgiveness can do. A lot of people can't do that.
Our own church is having a thing Wednesday night with Jean Bishop, whose
Another thing.
sister was killed, and how Jean wrote a book about forgiveness and her journey to forgive.
She might with the murder.
Yeah, I'm not sure. She's done a lot of soul searching on forgiveness.
Thank you, this coming Wednesday.
This coming
Be
Wednesday.
there. Great.
The guy show up, kept it too.
He's still in jail.
Yeah.
He's still in jail.
Well, as We're learning about this wonderful group. You're ahead of us. We're starting to answer questions we thought we should ask. So, look, I mean, here's the next slide. I love it. Just to underscore what we've been saying. What we were thinking, okay, the word debt, not actually a request to pay, monetary debts, or to forgive loans we've made, because it's more than that. And other traditions, like we said, the word is trespasses. We all do wrong, we all are wrong, willingly or mistakenly. And then again, interpretation after interpretation, different languages, it seems to be a synonym for the word sin, just, under different circumstances, different cultures, different words have been used. And then, so rather than asking for, money we borrowed, there's gotta be something more. Are we asking God to forgive us the kind of debt that we could never repay? Something that truly needs, real forgiveness. There's something that we can never live up to, like you said, God's level of grace and forgiveness.
Yeah, I just think the whole idea of, God's gift to us is so much greater than we ever give back to God. And I think that's kind of the idea here, is that we can't make it up. And because just life itself, we don't give life like that. So.
I'm curious. The use of the word as, it makes it sound like God only forgives, but God follows us. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. So first we have to forgive our debtors. And then God follows and forgives us. It seems a little strange to me. I just wondered if that was just the way the language evolved, but that's the way I read it, is that we have to first forgive and then God will follow our lead.
I wonder though, I'm just saying this because I have no basis of knowledge of this, but I wonder if there's like a verb tense thing, like even as we will going forward.
That's what I'm wondering. Yeah, it's a
Forgive
little
our
strange
debtors
the
as
way
we
it's
have
been
forgiven.
translated, perhaps.
So that translator, whoever used the word as in English, was that an infallible person? I mean, they were just doing it at the time, the year that they wrote it, it made sense to the people in that church, I guess.
Well, were these words spoken by Jesus? That's a.
So it goes back to, we have some,
Yeah.
should we keep going forward?
Yes.
Or was this added by
Hold your
somebody?
breath.
Right before, I wanted to go back to the thinking about that, think about the Jubilee year.
Thank you, yes.
So that's what we'll talk about.
Thank you.
Even,
All right, then, yes, and psychologically speaking, I'll just pile this on, you don't have to go too deep into it, but a lot of the theological, modern stuff has to take, because post Freud, we've got to, this is the way modern people think. After Freud and Marx, we can't get away from this. So there's some psychology in it. And this is a UCLA psychologist who said, hopefully this is helpful. There ought to be 3 types of forgiveness. Something called exoneration, which is a complete restoration, where the offender accepts full responsibility, turns from that wrong, and your relationship is healed. And then what we can think of as forbearance, only a partial apology, not a full confession. The offender is still blaming you partially, not accepting full responsibility, and the relationship has to be unstable because there's never the trust that was once there before. And then what we call a release, sounds kind of legalistic to me, where the offender does not apologize, the attitude and actions do not change, the relationship is lost, a total lack of trust. But you must let go of the negative and just move forward alone. So that's just not only true forgiveness, but just that relationship is gone. But it takes 2 to tango. This is 2 people who have got to learn how to live together, like it or not.
Does the last one kind of go along with the thought, forgive, but don't forget?
Yeah, where I came from.
Yeah.
And something else, just another aside. We were all raised this, must have come from the Bible, right? To err is human, to forgive divine. That was Alexander Pope, a Victorian poet. We just put it in, I guess, really precise, numbers,
Kind of nice.
poetic words.
Concise.
Because yes, exactly, poetic.
That's interesting.
No,
Your last one is there.
that's right. So let's go to mother. Just a second. If I stop sharing this.
And forgive us, we both had very busy weeks and
Yeah.
it's slides, we will forgive you.
Do I just stop share?
And then all of you are doing it.
And then I'll
Say, wow.
screen share something else.
Oh, and hello to Flurry.
Oh, Gloria, we didn't see you. Good morning.
Morning.
Morning, Blurry.
I think I need to share this,
Please.
Ghanaians
Yes.
have a perception of an approach to, we have a legal system, everything all right. However, things are resolved in a process. So if I know you, we've lived in a community, we belong to a church, I won't take a thing I have with you straight to the legal system.
Right.
It will be wrong.
Oh, yeah.
So first, I will
Talks
look,
about that.
right, I will find somebody that is close to you. I will probably go to your husband and say, this is what you have done to me. Or this is what is happening. And if he's not able to resolve it, then I will come to the church because we all belong to the same church. And so before it gets to any extent that legally, it would have been resolved at some point.
That's that Matthew gospel. It's more communal. Because it's not just, we're so individualistic here. Again, our culture is so, you've got a more.
So here are times when cases go to court, the judge can listen to both sides of the story and can say, take it back home and resolve it. Yes, and we have chiefs in the community. So there are some cases that are to be resolved by the chiefs. Being in marital, whatever.
Right.
The thing that makes perfect sense about that is the opportunity to resolve it is the communication between the people directly affected first.
Right.
And then as much as possible.
Is there a focus on forgiveness? That's
Yes.
different than? than how
No,
we see it?
it's the same, but to get it easier, and when you come to me with something, I won't just brush it off. I will have to listen to the facts of it and try and resolve it. And even we practice it here, within the Ghanaian community here. Somebody does something to you, so because we are living in America and things are different, we tend to do things that when it comes to the legal, it will be wrong.
So externally,
Yes,
then it's imposed upon whatever the settlement is.
right,
As opposed to internally through communication and a loving heart.
exactly.
Yeah.
You know,
I love that.
it's interesting. I won't go into it now. Sometime I'd like to talk about this and briefly, and it's just the idea of justice and the legal system is very different. It's based on rights than biblical sense of what it means to just, which is based on relationship. It's radically different. No more sense of entitlement. No entitlement in Christian justice. We're not entitled to anything. It's all based on God's grace. So that's a really interesting discussion to have, the implications of thinking like that. Sometimes we can do that, but I think that's kind of behind more of the Ghanaian. It's relationship that's important.
Nice.
Okay, so the next set of slides that we had, there's a little bit of overlap, but again, just wanted to show you the context of different ideas of forgiveness. So and I just put two translations in, just for the sake of seeing how.
The same passage.
Yeah, the same passage, but, so forgiveness is mentioned in Exodus. And we'll just keep sliding forward. This is just to give you an idea. Mentioned in Psalm 32:5. Then I confess my sins to you. I did not conceal my wrongdoings. I decided to confess them all to you, and you forgave me my sins. And okay, so now a different,
There's another one.
Hosea, yeah, okay, thank you. So then in Hosea, the people say, let's return to the Lord. He has hurt us, but he will be sure to heal us. He has wounded us, but he will bandage our wounds, won't he? So again, different types of sins and different types of forgiveness. And then in the New Testament,
On with the kinds of language there.
oh, sorry,
I'm sorry, no, that's all right.
okay.
John.
So in the New Testament, forgive is derived from the Greek word aphemi, which means to release or remit a debt. And it does have both monetary and non-monetary connotations. Do I have that one?
Let's see.
Language derivations?
Oh, yeah, there it is, sorry.
And so that's just what we were talking about, how we started off our conversation, different ideas of what, of forgiveness or of what debts mean. Okay,
Thanks, John.
and we're just gonna, some of this we've talked about already, Greg, I think you found this one too. If we confess our sins to God, he will keep his promise and do what is right. He will forgive us our sins and purify us from our wrongdoing. So this, we both wanted to provide a little bit of just context of where else this idea came from in the Bible itself. And then I got kind of off on another pathway as I was looking at all this. So, what I discovered is the biblical basis for this petition of the Lord's Prayer in the New Testament were written in part with the reference to the biblical seventh year laws, and that was called Shemitah, I think. And that's from Deuteronomy. At the end of every 7 years, thou shalt make a release. And this is the manner of the release. Every creditor that lendeth aught unto his neighbor shall release it. He shall not exact it of his neighbor or of his brother, because it is called the Lord's release. Of a foreigner thou mayest exact it again, but that which is thine with thy brother, thine shall release.
Wow.
American credit,
The American what?
credit.
So there was no bankruptcy.
Hey, student loan, yeah, forgiven, right? How many years?
I never heard of Shemitah before.
So the first reference to this is in Exodus. For 6 years you are to sow your land and gather in its produce. But in the seventh, you are to let it go, to let it be, that the needy of your people may eat, and what remains, the wildlife of the field shall eat. Do thus with your vineyard and also your olive grove.
That sounds scary.
Pretty environmentally friendly.
Absolutely.
So now go to. So, and this actually, is, in part where our understanding of the word sabbatical comes from. Okay, so during the Shemitah, so in order to, sorry, I'm doing this, I might go back to the field one, okay. So the farmers, for 6 years, you're gonna sow your land, reap the benefits of it, but in the seventh, you're gonna let it go. Okay, and all the produce that's there, people who need it may eat it, including the animals. Okay, so. So during this practice, the farmers were forbidden from cultivating their crops or selling produce that grew in their fields. They had to release it to the public, whatever grew. Their land was fenced in. They had to prop open the gates for everyone to come and glean, as dictated in Exodus. Okay, so a part of this, and this is my surface level understanding from my very quick research, was that the laws required that the farmers' financial debts would be relieved while the land lay fallow like that. That's how they would be able to do that. Okay, so their debts were forgiven so that they could share their wealth, their produce, the fruits of their labor, I guess that's what I'm searching for, with others.
I mean, for that year, but not.
For that
completely.
year. For that year. Okay, so now let's go back. Okay, so it took me a while to understand, to quite get what this was saying here, but I think what happened was that then, knowing that this was going to happen in the 7th year, lenders became somewhat hesitant to even then fund loans for the people who they knew they would be having to release them of their debts. So complete debt relief had the unintended effect of drying up loans to the poor. So workaround was developed to ensure that such loans continued. As this was second best to complete debt forgiveness, the rabbis of Jesus's era set strict poor-friendly conditions on lending and interest rates. The Shemitah laws of debt relief remained an important moral principle. Okay.
So what happened when Rome came in and demanded their money on the 7th year? It must have been really.
If I had a part 2 for next week, I could give you that.
Did Jesus sect kind of make Rome scared about what they were talking about?
I would think so.
Yeah, okay,
Probably
so,
why I got crucified.
Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, but a lot of it is not Caesar's at all.
so forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. This particular interpretation, it seemed to me, is like building off of what our discussion of last week was with us and how we began our whole discussion of our prayer of our Father and what it meant to be community. I felt like last week we had such a nice conversation about all the different facets of that and understandings of us.
And we started our daily bread.
Yeah. So part of this then was that the gleaners, the people who come in and, you know, benefit from the produce that they could collect. And by the way, when I lived in Denver, there was always there was a day that there was like an official gleaning day that our church participated in. And we would go into the fields and collect all of the fallen crops, what was there in excess of what had been already
Well, that's
officially gathered. And then it would go to like charities, yeah. I mean, it was a day that churches participated in.
This church used to do something like that. We went out in northern Illinois and we were participating, we had land that we would set aside and the produce would go towards the shelters and we would pay for that. We'd go watch them plant, or I forget if it was a planting of it or the gleaning of it, and we collected it. There was a big picnic with the local church.
So the interesting thing that I also found out though was that the gleaners were allowed to store the produce that grew uncultivated during this year as long as some also remained in the field for the animals to eat. Once the natural supply there was exhausted, storage was prohibited. And what that was meant to do was to make sure that even the gleaners weren't hoarding. So in other words, the more that was left in the fields for the slower gleaners, like, you know, when there's an Easter egg hunt, like everyone goes out and grabs all at once. The more that was left in the fields for the slower gleaners and animals, the longer the harvested produce could be stored. So this mechanism encouraged balance between the needs of those who could store and those who had to glean day to day, and also between man and other living things. Which I thought that was really interesting, that there was put into place all these mechanisms for equality and balance at various levels. So this is one of the sources that I got. I thought I should just acknowledge my source. Yeah.
I thought this was nice.
Did I have another one? Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay. So there were consequences for non-compliance, okay? So the Talmud came down hard on the people who violated this. And this, we were talking earlier just about the difference between, direct communication and understanding and participation. And then when outside forces or mechanisms had to come in to enforce something. But the Talmud came down hard on the Shemitah violators. There were penalties and public disgrace. Even the fall of the temple and the 2,000-year Jewish exile were attributed by the sages of the Talmud to widespread spiritual resistance to and violation of sabbatical laws. And then just a reminder that the Talmud was the record of the rabbinic debates on the teaching of the Torah. So it was trying to understand how they apply and also seeking answers for actual situations and experiences that they were encountering in real life, in their present day life.
There used to be something, I forget which year it was, every 49 years, land that you had been traded would go back to the original owners. So no one accumulated too much wealth.
Wow. And maybe just
Yours goes back to the original owner would never lose wealth either.
Well, it'd be their family, it's passed on generations, so we go back to the family, because things were very much communal. And which was a way of preventing what's happening in our nation, which is massive accumulation of wealth on the part of a few people.
So just to reveal my source.
You made all this up.
Because I'm a teacher and I always do acknowledge your sources. So this was an article that I found, and it was from a magazine called Tablet, which was a new reading on Jewish life. But I also loved the title of it. This is what drew me to it. It was, there's gleaning to do how ancient sabbatical laws can work in a modern economy. Okay, so here was the question. The Shemitah mandates debt forgiveness and that the fields and field workers rest. In this new year, meaning every 7 years, can we adopt such a practice? Okay, so this is part 2 of the background of all the information I gave you. It's what that means today. And so this is what I thought was just really interesting. How would you expand the concept to modern day? Okay, because
I would forgive student loans. Well, since we forgave all the billionaires in California for their bad behavior, we think of what this does.
We talked about it this week. Maybe this whole hour would just be talking about Silicon Valley Bank.
I would like to-
Let's move on.
That's been bothering me all week. How can those bankers they've been bailed out and we have the tremendous amount of homelessness and people not having enough to eat in this country.
Because go down the road in San Francisco, the homelessness is awful
Yeah.
in the shadows of the billionaire.
It's because they write the laws, the rich write the laws in this country.
However, let me argue the other side. When I think about the people who got hurt, who were in the banks, I think about the big people, but there is a woman who has a business she started, some revenues of interesting. It matches people who need to find home care for elder care with people who need it. It's kind of a website thing. She had 28 employees. She was scrambling 5 days. How am I going to meet? I'm legally required to meet payroll. How am I going to meet payroll if there is not something done? So it's not just these big people who were greedy. It was a bank that got so involved in, and they had huge deposits, way larger percentage of big deposits, which are not covered by FDC, the SCA typically. So a very different situation, and that's what left them so vulnerable.
So you might think the analogy would be like, you know, the farmer gets reimbursed gets forgiven his debts. And then all the animals can come in and nature can restore itself.
Right.
And so I don't want to say trickle down, that has other connotations, but it means more like a balance. To me, it feels more like a balance and creating more of an equilibrium. So, but in a different, slightly different slant, some contemporary business analysts believe that adapted Shemitah practices should apply to today's most critical industries. Those that are closest equivalents of the ancient agricultural engines. So the next one, and again, this was from, the article was from a new reading on Jewish life. So, yeah, so the first two questions here, yeah, I did that one.
Oh, yes, it's sorry.
Sorry, I was reading from mine. Okay, would be what are our obligations to land and people in general? And then, the subtext for Israel would have been to land and people within Jewish world and in Israel. Okay, but still, I think in general, a growing movement of thinkers and activists has pointed to this as a means of addressing global environmental problems and the economic stability of the 21st century, challenging contemporary expectations of continued economical growth, development, and individual gains. Which I just found that so intriguing, and so let's look at the next one.
That's amazing.
Are these excerpts from
From the article that I found.
okay,
Yeah.
are they based on people's ministry, when they got into the ministry, certain rituals that they did, like the prayer, forgiveness? Is that a link to like them getting into the ministry to preach?
Not exactly. This is more of the background of the practice of forgiving debts that began with this idea of forgiving the debts for the land every 7 years.
Okay.
So what that made me think of, and is particularly our week in the news this week, the repeal of SNAP. Like, so, you know, is evaluating that decision, the bank failures and rescue, and like, it just seemed to me to be very interesting to kind of put into that idea of Shemitah, like the decisions that we make in terms of what we forgive, what we equalize, and what the what the byproducts are of that as they extend beyond the first circle of that. And, you know, even our educational system, you know, being funded by, you know, primarily property taxes, what would it look like if we found a different way to do that, to equalize that? So,
I mean, not housing valuations as a way of figuring taxes, but some other way of looking at overall wealth.
right,
To, as forgiveness as the first step towards, you know, equity and balance. Some states have just a statewide tax that funds all the schools in the state. Illinois has got some amazing school districts and some school districts which need money, depending on the local property values.
Right. That's, you know, that will get to a good argument.
Did this article have any examples of how they had used this?
well, I think one of them was, the guy was talking about high tech, and it was I think like every 7th year, products would be sold at cost without any profit to the companies. But like I said, I did a fairly surface level first pass. And it just went with the ideas that seemed most interesting.
You know, I heard years ago, there was someone proposing that the charter, the basic charter for corporations be changed. That they could change it from making a profit for its investors to making a profit for the investor and social, and somehow includes social well-being. But it had a responsibility more than just to their stockholders, have a responsibility to the larger society.
Larger community.
That's,
right?
you know,
That's great.
it's based on state law. How corporations running and the relationship between shareholders and management. You can guess why Delaware is such a popular state. If you want to have a successful corporation these days, or for decades, it's gotta be a Delaware corporation or else people won't take you seriously. And I can say, I don't want to talk law too much, but it's the law where the managers can get away with the most. It's called the business judgment rule. The shareholders, it's really hard for a shareholder to sue the manager of the company for making a bad business decision, because in Delaware, we put our faith and our money in the managers to the CEO can do whatever she or he wants. It's, but you know, there are other states where there's a more equitable balance where the shareholders can
Well, that's
say,
very
I can give you some money to this great .com business you said you're gonna start, and you just spend it all yourself. I'm gonna get that back from you. So not as many people want their companies to be Illinois corporations, they're mostly in Delaware.
And so here, this was the slide I was thinking of, Chuck. This particular man advocated that modernized Shemitah applications, suggesting that Israeli high-tech firms sell products at cost for the duration of that year and extend sabbaticals to employees.
That's very interesting.
A little
That's
hard
a
to.
radical idea.
Wouldn't it be a more forgiving society if we finally go to a 4-day work week? Or we can talk about that later.
Why work at all?
Good point. Gig from home.
Well, I don't know, I like the ideas, this whole sabbatical idea is, I remember I did sabbatical, had a little foundation. Grant to do sabbatical for 3 months. And, I spoke at the Rotary Club, which is a very conservative group, a very large club in Moline, a very conservative group of businessmen, and you could hear the groaning. But, you know, I really, you know, there are corporations that do that for the, at least executives, like McDonald's, Foods, fast food restaurants, they do that. It's very powerful to, give people a break and give the land a break. I just love that you brought this forgiveness question under the social piece.
So,
Because this is exactly
the idea
where we live.
The idea of sabbatical is not working. It's more the restoration
Right,
and the
Right.
restoration and the healing and at a more widespread level.
right. The idea of sabbatical is not what happens with academics. Once we've got to produce a book, a few journals, some studies while they're on sabbatical. That's not really the idea of sabbatical.
Right, the university expects you to go out and make us some more money,
Right.
especially STEM professors, not English professors who, you know, can't really be about.
So it's an opportunity, right, in the academic sense, to go off and pursue other studies that you would not otherwise have an opportunity to pursue. That's what the idea is.
Where do you get those, when the non-profit organization, try to raise money, they have those pamphlets, those books, you put the coin in there and you pass it around, you know, and to raise money for your, business. Are they still available? Where do you buy those from?
Oh, that's a good question.
What do you call them?
A traditional way for a 501c3 charitable organization to raise money, that's.
And they stick the coin in there. You know what I'm talking about? They put the coin in the pocket of it.
I still see those in some stores.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Walgreens says, do you want to donate $1? Just press yes on your.
Right.
Sure.
On the little credit card machine, right?
Or you just round up, you know,
Yeah, or round
next
up.
dollar, just
Yeah.
give it there.
It seems to me though, one of the problems that we have in this country is that we're still so focused on the well-being of the individual as opposed to the well-being of the community. And unless we change our mindset,
Mm-hmm.
I don't I don't see how these kinds of things can happen, will be
Yeah.
easily achieved.
It's a very.
That American rugged individualism, which made us so great in its extreme sense, right? And it's, as the trajectory of time goes on, it's had some consequences to that.
Absolutely.
And many negative
So it
consequences.
has a lot to do with property laws, though. It is, it's,
That's right.
what's mine is mine.
We've done a
You can't
lot.
take it. And now
We
we've
took
got
it away
laws.
from the Indians.
What?
We took it away from the Indians.
We invented, well, we won't go into that, but we invented a way to justify that.
That's right, so
They
we
were not making use of their land well as we could.
Oh,
So
yeah.
therefore, the excuse not.
So this simple few words of the Lord's Prayer, there's a lot of different ways we could take it. We tried to at least skim the surface on the personal, spiritual life of our relationship with God, the social with each other, the psychological aspect of how we deal with, ourselves. And that I loved it. We came down to one of the core things. This whole concept can't exist just alone, because there has to be a forgiver and a forgivee. And so that has to, if you want to extend it, which we have, into the social message between two people, that if we treat everybody in the neighborhood, in the village, in the tribe, in the country, in the world, in the same way, well, there's a lot of ways to look at it.
I keep coming back, and this is something I learned in theology school, and it's always stayed with me, is that, in the biblical way of seeing justice is that we deserve nothing. Everything's been given to us. We didn't ask for birth. Birth was a windfall. And it's all grace. It's not like there's a self-made man or woman.
Right.
And if we deserve nothing, no one's entitled to anything. The whole idea, well, I'm entitled because I have these rights, which is a very functional way of seeing things. Frankly, I don't know how you get around doing something like that on a legal basis. But for a Christian, it's no, we don't have any rights. God has been good to us. Life is grace. Therefore, I should respond gracefully to my neighbor. And it's a lot more freeing than seeing rights. Because everyone these days, I'm entitled to this, which I don't know. I don't want to do away with it because it's kind of who we are. It's kind of the way the world has to work at some level. But I just wonder how to be able to see that it's more the relationship with God that controls. We do something out of a sense of compassion and love, as opposed to, well, I've got to do this because it's his right and I've got to pay it back. One is more deeper, centered in the whole person. I don't know how else to say that.
That's a great
Thank you.
That's
We're
a
getting
great
towards the
segue.
end, and these last couple slides, I want to open it up to everybody else, especially those who haven't had a chance or might be trying to raise their hand. And we're looking at you, JS and Flurry. So just tell me if this helps, and we'd love to hear from you, because the more we thought about it, the more it was clear this is not an easy thing to do. A lot of people say it's not natural at all. Well, who else except for a loving, gracious God would have to teach us this? Is it human nature? Whatever human nature might mean, if there's such a thing, but it could be much easier not to forgive when people offend or injure us. If it were so easy, why would we have to pray for it in the first place? So given the types of awful things that people have done to other people, and yeah, that little parenthetical would go on for a book, I guess, or an encyclopedia, how powerful must our God's grace be to allow this concept to be, to exist and for people to act on it. And please let me know, everybody chime in if you can, especially those at home. If you have any things you want to share about what you personally found difficult over the years to forgive in others, and likewise, if we have time, what's been difficult for which to expect forgiveness from others. JS, Flurry, are you guys there?
I don't have a direct answer. All I have, which should surprise none of you, is my experience. And my experience is my father and I had a very rocky relationship pretty much from day one. his way of wanting to love me didn't sit well with me. And I wanted something from him that he wasn't able to give me. And then vice versa. So we went through our lives together, getting along, but always with an uneasy taste to the relationship. And this lasted for decades. And one day I woke up and knew that he and his wife were coming to visit. They lived in California and they were going to come to Chicago to visit. And usually I sort of dreaded that. And I realized I looked forward to it. I wanted to see him. And when they got here, I realized that he wanted to see me too. And everything that had stood in our way for decades was gone. And neither of us ever forgave the other. It was all grace. Somehow or other, grace had scrubbed the relationship clean. And we both knew it. And we didn't have to say anything. And it didn't extend to my two brothers and their relationship with him. But it was solid for us, and it remained so until his death.
That is beautiful. Thank you, JS. Thank you. I don't know if we could end any better than that.
No.
We only have one more slide and it's time to get to church, everybody, but just one little thing, as we talk about things like this, and thanks again, Ellen, for asking us to wing it for a couple of weeks, because it's been very.
You guys studied deeply, I'm impressed.
It's fun to study this stuff. And this group, we touch on a lot of different topics, but I think we've learned, I've learned a lot from past things, and how just less than a year ago, Reinhold Niebuhr comes up a lot. This, a really truly American theologian who was talking about American society, and I had to look him up, and that led to a couple other things. And so at one point, Niebuhr said, "No virtuous act is as virtuous from the standpoint of a friend or a foe as it is from our standpoint. Therefore, we must be saved by the final form of love, which is forgiveness." And somehow that tied in, I haven't read this book, but the ironies of American history, and he talked a lot about how we're a nation of really loving, forgiving people, but somehow we've created a pretty rotten society. That was the point. And that led into someone else around the same generation named Paul Tillich, who's known as a Christian existentialist, pretty deep stuff. But it inspires me to think that and this book is called The Courage to Be. It really takes an act of. It's
It's the easiest thing you can read by him. It's a collection of sermons. I don't suggest reading his systematics.
I was going to bring it in if anybody had to,
It's a great book.
hours. So simply, it's not simple, but the courage to be, in this respect, is the courage to accept the forgiveness of sins, which is something a lot of us don't do very well. I've had hard times myself. So not as an abstract assertion, just to think about it in a college classroom, but as the fundamental experience in the encounter with God. Between two people, God can be found. And then I couldn't do any better than a song from college where people like Bob Dylan and Tom Petty,
Roy Orbison,
and one of the Beatles, George Harrison had one album super good called The Traveling Wilburys. You've probably heard of it.
Yeah.
All they had to say was, "Remember to live and let live. It's all right. The best you can do is forgive." And it's unforgettable because I can't think of anything more important to do. And there might be, no love without it.
It's interesting how forgiveness is so tied with love.
You can't have one without the other, can you?
Right.